Have you ever stopped to think, like, where does intelligence even come from?
Yeah,
Like, we always just assume it's, those neurons firing in a brain, right?
right.
But what if that's just like one tiny little expression of something much, much bigger?
Hmm.
What if intelligence is like baked into the universe itself,
Yeah.
showing up in places we'd never even think to look?
It's a fascinating question, isn't it?
That's exactly what we're going to be diving deep into today.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. So to help us navigate this pretty wild territory, we're going to be looking at the work of Michael Levin.
Right, Michael Levin.
He's a developmental biologist at Tufts University, and let me tell you, his work will really shake up your ideas about what it means to be intelligent.
Definitely.
You might have actually come across his ideas already if you've ever watched that YouTube channel, The Trajectory, and their Worthy Successor series.
Oh, yeah, I love that series.
It's a great series.
They really get into some deep stuff.
Yeah, they really do. And Levin's research is definitely among the deepest. He's suggesting that intelligence isn't limited to just brains.
Right.
It might not even be limited to living things as we traditionally think of them.
It's pretty mind-blowing.
He's really pushing us to consider a much, much broader definition of what it means to be smart, to be intelligent.
So, in this deep dive, our mission, should we choose to accept it, is to try to unpack some of Levin's most important ideas.
I love it.
Especially this concept of post-human intelligence.
Right.
Like what comes after.
Yeah, what does intelligence look like when it's not bound by our current human limitations?
Right, exactly. And we're going to be using this really interesting interview transcript to kind of guide our exploration.
It's a great interview.
Yeah, it covers a lot of ground. So it should give us a good roadmap to understanding these sometimes pretty complex ideas.
Absolutely.
So where do we even begin with this?
Well, I think a good place to start is with Levin's idea that our own evolutionary history, kind of like our evolutionary firmware, as he calls it,
Yeah?
might actually be blinding us to other forms of intelligence.
It's like we're wearing these evolutionary blinders.
Exactly.
And we can only see this very narrow sliver of what intelligence could be.
Yeah, it's like we're only turned in to pick up on one very specific frequency, and we're missing this whole other symphony of intelligence that might be out there.
So it's like imagine you're, an alien species that evolved in a world of complete darkness.
Mm.
You might develop incredible senses of hearing and touch and smell, but you'd have no concept of light or color.
Right.
It'd be like, those things don't even exist for you.
And so maybe we're like that with intelligence. Maybe we're so fixated on our own human version of intelligence that we're completely missing other equally valid and maybe even more amazing forms of intelligence.
Like right under our noses.
Potent.
So I think it's interesting that Levin starts with this idea that we all began as, a single cell.
Yeah, like this tiny blob of chemistry and physics, as he describes it.
Right. And that somehow that single cell managed to transform itself into the incredible complexity of a human being.
It's kind of mind-boggling when you think about it.
It really is.
Yeah.
All the information, all the problem solving, all the coordination that had to happen over millions of years of evolution to get from that single cell to us sitting here right now having this conversation.
And for Levin, that journey suggests that maybe, just maybe, there's some kind of inherent problem-solving capacity within matter itself.
Yeah, he sees that as a form of intelligence, the ability for matter to organize itself, to adapt, to solve problems.
And he doesn't think it's something that suddenly appears when a brain develops.
Right.
He sees it as being active right from the very start, from the moment of conception. Like the development of an embryo, the way it unfolds from a single cell into a complex organism, that's intelligence at work for him.
Oh, I see what you're saying. It's not just about the end product, the brain. It's about the whole process of getting there.
Exactly. And it's not just about individual cells either. He talks a lot about collective intelligence.
Right, like how individual units can come together and create something much greater than the sum of their parts.
Right. Just like your brain is a network of billions of individual neurons working together.
Or an ant colony.
Yeah, or a flock of birds, or even something like the internet. All these individual units, whether they're cells or ants or computers, can interact and collaborate in a way that gives rise to a kind of emergent intelligence.
And he says this ability for simple things to form these collectives, these intelligent systems, is extremely ancient.
Oh, yeah, he emphasizes that. He says it goes back way beyond the evolution of brains.
So we're talking billions of years.
Billions of years. He even suggests it might go down to the level of individual molecules within a cell.
Wow, okay.
Like even within a single cell, There's this incredible amount of coordination and communication happening between all these different molecules.
That's a whole world we're usually completely oblivious to.
Right, and that's part of Levin's point. He says that life is constantly striving and solving problems in many, many spaces that we do not comfortably notice.
So, like, there could be all this intelligence happening all around us, even inside of us, but we're just not equipped to recognize it.
Right, because our definition of intelligence is too narrow.
So if we're going to expand our understanding of intelligence, we need a new definition, right?
Exactly. And Levin actually borrows a definition from the philosopher William James.
Okay, and what does James say?
Well, James defines intelligence as the ability to reach the same goal by different means.
Interesting.
So it's not about having a particular physical structure like a brain.
It's more about the ability to solve problems and achieve goals, regardless of how you do it.
Exactly. And what's important for you to notice about this definition is that it focuses on achieving a specific outcome.
Okay, so the outcome is key.
The outcome is key. And that opens up the possibility of considering forms of intelligence that might have completely different goals than we do. Goals we might not even be able to comprehend.
So he's saying there could be intelligent beings out there that are intelligent in ways we can't even imagine.
Right, and that's where this idea of this TAM, technological approach to mind everywhere, comes in.
TAM, technological.
It's a bit of a mouthful.
Yeah.
But basically what he means is that everything in the universe exists on a spectrum of cognitive abilities.
Okay, a spectrum.
From the simplest particles to the most complex brains or artificial intelligence. It's not like there's this hard line between things that are intelligent and things that are not.
So like a rock would be on the very low end of the spectrum.
Right.
And then like a human brain would be somewhere higher up.
Right, higher up. And maybe there are things way beyond human intelligence on that spectrum, things we haven't even encountered yet.
Like a super intelligent AI.
Exactly. Or maybe even something beyond our current understanding of what AI could be.
So what would be the minimum requirements for something to be considered intelligent in this framework?
Levin says it boils down to two things: goal-directedness and indeterminacy.
So first, you have to have some kind of drive towards an outcome, a goal you're trying to achieve.
Right.
And second, you can't be completely predictable.
Exactly. There has to be some degree of flexibility, some ability to adapt and respond to changing circumstances.
That makes sense.
And what's really interesting is that he connects this to some pretty fundamental ideas in physics.
Like what?
Well, he talks about the least action principle, which is this idea that things in the universe tend to take the most efficient path.
Like the path of least resistance.
Exactly. And then he also talks about quantum indeterminacy, which is this inherent randomness at the quantum level.
So even the smallest particles in the universe have some element of unpredictability.
Right. And for Levin, that unpredictability, that freedom to deviate from a predetermined path, is a crucial ingredient for intelligence.
It's like even at the most fundamental level, the universe is wired for creativity and problem solving.
Potentially, yeah.
And he gives some really interesting examples of like unexpected intelligence in really simple systems.
Oh, yeah. Like he talks about the learning and self-regulating abilities of molecular networks, even without the structure of a cell.
Wow.
And he even mentions how simple computer algorithms, like bubble sort, which is this really basic sorting algorithm, can actually exhibit surprising problem-solving capabilities.
So even in systems we normally think of as being completely mindless, there might be these hidden sparks of intelligence.
Exactly. And that really challenges our assumptions about what it means to be intelligent and where we might find intelligence in the universe.
So what are the implications of all this?
Well, for me, it really makes you question whether we're thinking about intelligence in the right way. Like, are we limiting ourselves by focusing so much on brains and neurons?
Right, like maybe we're missing out on a whole universe of possibility.
And it also makes you question whether we're really making the most of our own intelligence.
Right, like are we using our intelligence in the best way possible?
Yeah, are we solving the right problems? Are we setting the right goals? And maybe even more fundamentally, are we even asking the right questions about intelligence?
It definitely makes you think. So, listening to Levin, it's easy to start feeling like we're really limited by our current biological form.
Oh, yeah.
Like we have this finite lifespan, we have all these physical vulnerabilities,
Right.
and we're constantly battling disease and aging.
And our cognitive abilities are limited too.
Yeah. And Levin really challenges this idea that, this is just how things are.
Right, he says things are absolutely not okay.
Yeah, he uses pretty strong language.
He points to all the suffering in the world, the birth defects, the childhood cancers, the limb loss, the aging process itself.
All the things we just accept as part of life.
Exactly. And he says this reliance on trial and error and random biological processes to determine our physical form and our limitations
Right.
is completely untenable.
Yeah, he's basically saying we're settling for a system that's inherently flawed.
And he envisions a future where our current biological existence will seem incredibly primitive.
Like something out of a horror movie.
Yeah, like something we'd be horrified by.
Like imagine looking back at a time when people died from simple infections.
Right.
That's how he thinks we'll view our current state of being.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical perspective.
So how do we get from here to there?
Well, that's where things get really interesting.
And this is where Levin starts talking about this idea of thoughts as thinkers.
Oh, yeah, that's a really important concept for him.
So can you unpack that a little bit?
Sure. So traditionally, we tend to think of ourselves as like this separate agent, this I that has thoughts.
Right, like I'm the thinker and my thoughts are just these things that happen in my head.
Yeah, but Levin challenges that view. He suggests that it's not just brains that are involved in cognitive processes.
So like our thoughts aren't just happening in our brains.
Right. He says it's possible that all cells and tissues might be involved in thinking.
Even like our skin cells and our muscle cells.
Potentially.
And this could even extend to technological and hybrid entities.
Right, like maybe our computers and our smartphones are already part of our extended cognitive network.
So the boundaries between what's us and what's not us start to get really blurry.
Exactly.
And he uses this really cool science fiction analogy to illustrate this idea of how agency and thingness are relative.
Oh, yeah, the Earth core beings.
Yeah. Like imagine these beings that live deep within the Earth's core.
And they have this completely different perspective on the world.
Right. And to them, we humans are just these fleeting patterns in a thin layer of gas on the surface.
Like we're just ripples in the atmosphere.
They might not even perceive us as individual beings.
Right, we might just be like these temporary patterns of heat and motion to them.
So it's like our sense of self, our sense of being a distinct individual.
Yeah.
It's really just a matter of perspective.
Exactly. And it makes you realize that maybe we're not as solid and permanent as we think we are.
Maybe we're more like these temporary patterns in a particular medium.
Right. And if we, as these temporary patterns in a biological medium, can exhibit agency and intelligence, then who's to say that other patterns in other kinds of media can't also be minds?
Like the universe could be teeming with intelligence that we're just not equipped to recognize.
Potentially, yeah.
And then Levin talks about this spectrum of thoughts.
Oh, yeah, that's fascinating.
Like on one end of the spectrum, you have these fleeting thoughts, the kind that just pop into your head and then disappear.
Right.
And then you have these more persistent thoughts, the ones that you keep coming back to, the ones that can actually change the structure of your brain.
Yeah, like learning a new skill or developing a new habit.
Right. And then on the far end of the spectrum, you have these really complex patterns of thought, like the fragmented senses of self that you see in dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah, where it's almost like there are multiple agents sharing the same body.
Right. And it makes you question whether there's really this clear-cut distinction between simple patterns and complex agents.
Maybe it's more of a continuum.
Yeah, maybe it's all just a matter of scale and complexity.
And that brings us back to that incredible transformation of a caterpillar into a butterfly.
Yeah, how does a caterpillar basically dissolve itself and then reassemble into a completely different creature?
And somehow retain its memories.
Right. It's amazing.
And for Levin, this is a really powerful example of how persistence isn't about staying the same.
It's about undergoing the right kind of change.
Exactly.
Like the caterpillar's memories have to somehow adapt and remap themselves onto the entirely new real estate of the butterfly's brain.
It's like they have to find a new way to exist in this new form.
And maybe that's what intelligence is all about, this ability to adapt, to evolve, to find new ways to exist and thrive in a constantly changing universe.
And maybe that's what we need to do as a species. We need to find a way to evolve beyond our current limitations, to become something more than what we are now.
So if we're talking about the future of intelligence, what kind of future do we want to create?
Yeah, what are the qualities that would make these future intelligences, as that YouTube series calls them, morally worthy successors?
Right, because it's not just about creating intelligence. It's about creating intelligence that's aligned with our values.
Exactly. And for Levin, one of the most important qualities for a morally worthy successor is compassion.
Okay, compassion.
And he defines compassion as the capacity to care for a much wider range of beings than humans currently do.
That's interesting.
Like, think about it.
Yeah.
Human compassion, while it's powerful, often has its limits.
Yeah, it's true. Like, we tend to feel a lot of empathy for those close to us.
Right.
But that feeling can kind of diminish as the number of individuals in need increases.
Or as they become more distant from us, geographically or emotionally.
Yeah, it's like our compassion has a limited range.
And Levin is saying that a truly mature intelligence, a morally worthy successor, would have a much broader range of compassion.
Like, they would be able to care about all beings equally, regardless of their species, their distance, or their relationship to us.
Exactly.
That's a pretty high bar.
It is, but for Levin, it's an essential bar.
So where does compassion come from? Is it something that we're born with, or is it something that we learn?
Yeah, that's a big question.
Like, is it just a sophisticated form of self-interest?
Right, like maybe we're only compassionate because it ultimately benefits us in some way.
Like, if we help others, they're more likely to help us in the future.
Exactly.
But Levin believes that a truly mature intelligence would be able to move beyond that kind of self-interested compassion.
Yeah, he thinks it's possible to develop a kind of compassion that's not based on any kind of calculation or expectation of reward.
Like a pure, unconditional love for all beings.
Exactly.
And he sees this as an engineering problem, not just a moral dilemma.
Like, if we can understand the underlying mechanisms of compassion, we can design systems that promote and enhance compassion.
So it's not just about hoping that future intelligences will be compassionate. It's about actively designing them to be compassionate.
Exactly.
And he even envisions a future where the need to kill to survive is overcome.
Yeah, like maybe we can find a way to sustain ourselves without causing harm to other beings.
It's a radical idea.
Yeah.
But it's a really hopeful one.
It is.
So, going back to this idea of persistence, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.
Right. And for Levin, thriving means evolving in the direction of greater intelligence and capability.
And he introduces this concept of future self-flets.
Oh, yeah, like these potential future versions of ourselves.
And he says that the choices we make right now are basically a form of communication with those future selves.
Yeah, it's like we're sending messages through time.
So every decision we make, every action we take is shaping the kind of beings we will become.
And he takes this idea even further, questioning the distinction between our future selves and the future selves of others.
So like, if I'm willing to make sacrifices for my own future well-being, why wouldn't I also be willing to make sacrifices for the well-being of others in the future?
Right, and that leads to this really profound idea, this potential future realization of oneness.
Like maybe we're all just different aspects of a single unified consciousness.
And that compassion isn't about helping someone else. It's about recognizing our interconnectedness, our fundamental unity.
It's a very spiritual idea.
It is.
But it's one that's grounded in Levin's scientific understanding of intelligence and consciousness.
Yeah, and it raises a lot of interesting questions about the nature of self and the nature of reality.
And it also gives us a lot of hope for the future.
Yeah, because if we can recognize our fundamental unity with all beings, maybe we can create a future where everyone thrives.
So, we've been talking a lot about the positive possibilities, but it's important to acknowledge that there are also potential dangers.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Like we're developing increasingly powerful technologies like artificial intelligence.
And we don't fully understand the implications of those technologies.
Right. And Levin is very concerned about this. He says we're making major mistakes.
Yeah, he's worried that we're rushing ahead without really understanding what we're doing.
He emphasizes that we don't actually create intelligence from nothing.
Right. We facilitate the ingression of intelligence.
Meaning that intelligence is already out there in the universe.
And we're just creating the conditions for it to manifest in new ways.
And he's particularly concerned about the development of advanced AI without a mature science of diverse intelligence.
Yeah, we need to understand the fundamental principles of intelligence in all its possible forms before we start creating superintelligent AI.
Otherwise, we could end up creating something that's beyond our control.
Or something that doesn't share our values.
Right.
And it's not just about AI either. He points out that we've already been creating collective intelligences for a long time.
Like our social systems, our economic systems, our political systems.
Exactly.
These are all examples of collective intelligence.
And we don't fully understand how they work either.
We're kind of just making it up as we go along.
And that can be dangerous.
So what's the solution?
Levin's call to action is to rapidly develop the science of diverse intelligence.
We need to understand intelligence in all its forms.
From the simplest organisms to the most complex AI.
We need to understand how intelligence emerges, how it evolves, and how we can guide its development in a positive direction.
And we need to do it quickly.
Because the future is coming, whether we're ready for it or not.
Absolutely.
So, to sum up this deep dive into Michael Levin's ideas, we've explored a much broader definition of intelligence than you might have considered before.
Yeah, we've seen how intelligence could extend far beyond the confines of the brain.
And we've seen how our own evolutionary history might be blinding us to other forms of intelligence.
We've also seen how our current biological form might be limiting us.
And how we might be able to overcome those limitations in the future.
We've delved into the interplay of agency and pattern, the drive for persistence through adaptation, the importance of compassion, and the need to develop a science of diverse intelligence.
It's been a lot to take in.
It has.
But I think it's been a really important conversation.
I agree.
So what are your final thoughts?
Well, I think Levin's work really challenges us to rethink our place in the universe.
Like, are we really the pinnacle of intelligence?
Or are we just one small step on a much longer journey?
Right. And if intelligence is as widespread as Levin suggests, what does that mean for our understanding of life, of consciousness, of the very nature of reality?
It's a lot to ponder.
It is. And I think it's important for us to keep these questions in mind as we move forward into the future.
Yeah, we need to be careful, we need to be thoughtful, and we need to be open to the possibility that there's much more to intelligence than we currently understand.
So here's a final thought for you to chew on. If intelligence truly exists on a spectrum that spans the entire universe, what does that mean for you?
What kind of future do you envision?
And what role can you play in shaping that future?
We encourage you to explore Michael Levin's work further and continue to reflect on these ideas. There's a whole universe of understanding waiting to be discovered.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time.
See you then.
Bye.